My stepfather and mother are going on a honeymoon with their kids, leaving me alone. So I make sure they don't come back into my house. I am 22 years old and the legal owner of the house I grew up in. After my father left it to me, I inherited this house from him when he passed away last year at the age of 47 due to a stroke. It was sudden, but I have now found peace with it. My parents divorced when I was 7 years old and had shared custody of me. So I spent half of the month with my mom and the other half with my dad. I must say I was closer to my dad because he understood me, and my mom, who was 50 years old, was always a bit too busy for me. I felt like I never had her full attention because work and men were more important to her. I don't think she treated me as a priority as such. But I was okay with that as long as I had my dad. A few years ago, just after I turned 18 and started college, my mom decided to move to Houston for work. So we started seeing each other less and only met around the holidays. 2 years ago, she brought her boyfriend at the time, Julian, who is 38 years old, to celebrate Christmas with us. He also brought his 2 sons, aged 18 and 16, from his previous relationship with his high school girlfriend. They had never married, but had split up about 7 years before he started dating my mom. That was a surprise for us because my mom had never brought any boyfriend to family dinners. But we gave Julian and his sons the warmest welcome we could and did our best to make them feel comfortable with us. It was a very pleasant evening and I would say, we all got along very well at that time. Even after that, whenever I talked to my mom on the phone, Julian would also greet me and he was very sweet to me. His sons were a bit shy and introverted, so they mostly kept to themselves, but overall, we had a good relationship. After my dad passed away, I found out that he left me the house. Fortunately, for some reason my dad divided all his assets in his will around my 18th birthday, because he always liked to plan ahead, even in morbid situations like these. Anyway, since I had just graduated, I decided to move in and find a job that wouldn't force me to move soon. I wanted to spend the next few years in my childhood home simply because it was my place of comfort. My mom wasn't very happy with my dad's decision and made sure I knew it after she found out about the will. She and Julian had been very sweet and supportive at the time of the funeral. But my mom was a bit gloomy when she realized she wasn't going to get the house back. This house was the one my parents bought together when they first got married, but my dad took it over during the divorce. It was a fair deal because she got away without paying alimony even though my dad had given up his career to stay home and raise me so my mom could focus on her work. So I think, keeping the house in the settlement and letting my mom go without alimony was completely fair. He recovered afterward with some help from his parents and even made sure I never felt neglected or unimportant. He did both jobs well and I didn't mind that my mom was upset about not getting the house back. She didn't talk about it much, but I could tell by her behavior that she wasn't happy about it. At that time, I didn't care because I was still mourning my dad. And my mom being upset about his will was the least of my worries. He left her all his wedding jewelry and all the gifts she had given him. So that should have been enough for her. She went back to Houston with Julian a few weeks after the funeral, and since then I've been living here on my own. However, about 6 months ago, my mom told me she was now engaged to Julian and wanted to get married where her home was. So she was going to come back here during the weeks leading up to the wedding because it didn't make sense to stay in a hotel when there was a house with enough spare rooms. His sons were also homeschooled, so they wouldn't have any issues with schools. I agreed with her. So I agreed to let them all move into my house and stay with me before the wedding. For a couple of reasons, I was tired of living alone, and I got along well with Julian, so I didn't think there was anything wrong with letting them live with me. Plus, my mom also promised to share all the bills with me while they lived here, which meant I didn't have to worry about overspending on that either. And so, they moved in with me about a month ago and have been here since then. It was nice to have them here, and I felt much less lonely than I used to when I lived alone. I thought I could get used to this. I even dreaded the day when they would all leave and go back to their normal lives because that would mean I would have to go back to my normal life alone too. But then, 2 weeks ago, 3 days before the wedding, my mom sat me down and asked if I would be willing to let them all live here permanently. I didn't expect it at all, but she explained that she had come back here to make me feel a little more comfortable with the idea of being part of a family and living with her, since she didn't like the idea of me living alone in this house. She planned to gradually introduce me to this, and now that she thought I was getting along, she wanted to know if I would be willing to make this a permanent arrangement. I wanted to say yes right away, but her behavior when she found out she wasn't going to get the house back puzzled me a bit. As much as I would have loved to make it a permanent arrangement, I didn't think it was a good idea to do it so soon and I didn't want to make the mistake of acting on my emotions. I knew this was the only logical solution to my overwhelming feelings of loneliness, but that didn't mean I had to let them all move in with me. And it had only been a month since they had been living here, so as much as I wanted to say yes, I ended up telling her I needed some time to think. It was a gut feeling, but I just knew for some reason that it would be best for me to give it some time and not make a hasty decision. I set aside my personal feelings and told her that I would inform her of my decision after the wedding. She seemed upset but didn't push the issue. 10 days ago, they finally got married and we had a great time at the wedding. They were supposed to stay here for a couple more days after the wedding and then return home. So, I was preparing to inform them of my decision, which was like this. But before I could do so, they all left for their honeymoon without even telling me. 2 days after their wedding, I woke up completely alone and everyone had gone. Many of their belongings were still at my house, so I decided to make some calls, but no one answered for quite some time and I continued to worry about it. I had planned to tell them about my decision that very day, but I couldn't even get in touch with them for hours. Finally, around noon, Julian answered and casually informed me that they had all gone on their honeymoon and wouldn't be back for a week. I was stunned because I obviously expected that they would at least inform me of their plans before just leaving, even if I wasn't included. I felt offended that they didn't ask me, but I didn't want to be petty. So, I started by asking why no one had informed me about any of this. And he gave me a poor excuse, saying they had forgotten to tell me, but he told me not to worry because they would be back soon. I tried to explain that wasn't the point at all. And my issue was that they simply left without a word or even a goodbye, and that was rude of them. I said I wanted to talk to my mom, but that's when his tone changed, and he said my mom was busy and didn't have time to talk to me. I still tried to stay calm and told him to let me know when she had time so that I could get in touch with her directly. And I said it politely, but he turned on me and suddenly went from being sweet to being a really biting and cruel stepfather. He told me that my mom was going to be busy for the next few days, and asked me not to bother them. He went on to say that there was no need to act so hysterically just because they had left me behind, and he felt the need to remind me that I was no longer a child. My mom now had a new family, so I needed to accept that, and by the time they got home, he wanted me to stop worrying about myself and clean the house for them. Now, I don't know who he thought he was talking to, but he certainly wasn't going to talk to me like that. He hung up right after saying that, and my anger was literally through the roof. I decided not to call my mom after that and thanked the universe for not letting me accept her suggestion before I had seen this side of her new husband. There was no way in hell they were going to live with me. So, I personally packed all of their belongings as carelessly and badly as I could. Stuffed them into a couple of cardboard boxes, and left them in the yard for them to find when they decided to return. I didn't care what would happen to those things, because they didn't belong to me, and they didn't belong inside a house that was mine either. After that, I went on with my life as usual and tried not to think about the betrayal I felt because of what my mom had done for no real reason. Yesterday, they finally returned from their honeymoon, and luckily, I was at work when they found all of their stuff in the yard. I had also changed the door locks in the meantime so they couldn't get in either. My mom was extremely angry when she contacted me about it. She told me I was being a spoiled child and that I was overreacting because to them, leaving me at home without notice wasn't something worth getting angry about and they hadn't done anything wrong. I simply told her to take her boxes and leave, and if I saw them on my property when I got home, I would call the police. She insulted me and then hung up. But I had to get back to work and couldn't waste my time worrying about it. When I got home after work, I noticed they had taken their things and left, and I thought that was the end of it. But the most annoying part was yet to come because around midnight, my mom called me and told me that Julian had something to say to me. He said he was sorry for the way he had spoken to me and retracted everything he had said. He would love to have a second chance to make amends with me and didn't want to be on bad terms with me over something so insignificant. I told him to shut up and leave me alone because I didn't need his fake apologies. I'm not stupid and could tell why he suddenly wanted to pretend to be a happy family now that I wasn't going to let them live with me. If he really regretted his actions, he wouldn't have waited so long to realize he had messed up and would have apologized right after that phone call that day, or even during their vacation for whatever it was. I'm sure my mom doesn't regret it either, but when she realized I wasn't going to forgive them, she chose to be sentimental with me and told me I was heartless for not letting them live with me. She said she was willing to share all the bills with me if I let her move back in, but she wanted to live in this house because it reminded her of my father. So it would be really selfish of me to kick them out like this without thinking about the repercussions that could have because she just wanted to come back to feel closer to my father apparently. She even said that Julian had just had a bad day that day and didn't mean anything he said. And even his sons missed me. So they wanted me to let them come back and start over here, but I wasn't going to accept any of that. I always knew my mom had her eye on this house since the divorce. And now that she'd seen this side of Julian, she didn't want to risk anything. So I told her they could come back home because I wasn't going to change my mind. And then out of nowhere, my mom started crying uncontrollably on the phone and accused me of being the most selfish child ever because I couldn't even let her live in the house where she'd spent the happiest days of her life over a simple disagreement I had with Julian. And because they hadn't taken me with them on their honeymoon, which wasn't even the main reason, she said I was being petty and cruel and that my dad would hate this ugly side of me. Am I the bad one for not allowing my mom and her new family to move back in with me after her new husband treated me poorly and they didn't ask me to join them on their honeymoon? Update 1. The comments on my original post weren't what I expected. Still, I don't think some of you needed to be so rude about it, but I understand the point everyone was trying to make. As for me, I stuck to my decision and didn't let my mom move back in because honestly, she simply doesn't deserve it. She hasn't been anything but rude to me so far. And I don't need any more of that in my life. It was nice while it lasted because both she and Julian were very kind to me at first. But once I told my mom that I still needed time to think, they started showing their true colors. Probably, they ran out of patience and thought they could bully me into letting them live with me, but unfortunately, I'm not that weak. I'd rather be alone than end up spending my time with the wrong people. I shouldn't have let them come here at all because her reaction when she found out the house deed had been transferred to me and not her should have been enough for me to realize how materialistic and selfish people can be when it comes to that. As for Julian, I'm glad he chose to senselessly argue with me and ended up ruining things for himself on a large scale. Because if he hadn't said that, we all would have been a happy family now, or I guess we could have been, but that's never going to happen because I'm not going to fall for their fake behavior again. I was alone. I missed my dad, and all my grandparents had already passed away, so I needed a family that would be my support system. But these people are definitely not up to that job, and I'm relieved I realized that before it was too late. It's been a few days since they left, but my mom has been calling me regularly and keeps texting me. Since I'm not answering her calls, she thinks I should at least give them one last chance to fix things. But they don't deserve it. They wasted their only chance, and if I give them another one, I'm sure they'll waste it too. And that will affect me more than anyone else, so it doesn't make sense to take that risk. I feel bad for treating my mom this way, but there's not much I can do in a situation like this. You reap what you sow, and in her case, she never bothered to make much effort with me. So she has no right to complain when she realizes that I'm not going to make life decisions based on her and her feelings. But she never did that for me. Update 2. Apparently, my mom not only insists but is quite desperate to move. Guess why? Because she didn't take a break from her job as she claimed. She was fired a couple of months before her wedding and has been living off her savings until now, which were quite substantial. But now, after an extravagant wedding and a luxurious honeymoon, she finally told Julian that they couldn't afford to come back and try their luck in Houston because she couldn't pay the rent there. And Julian quit his job to be a house husband after meeting my mom so he couldn't help. Now, they needed to find a place here and my mom just assumed that I would let them live with me. Julian had no idea about any of this until she told him the truth, which is why he didn't even bother to apologize. So I was right about him not having any real remorse for his behavior. He is as fake as can be, but that's the kind of husband my mom deserves anyway. Today she contacted me and asked me to let them move in for just a couple of days until she can find a decent job that pays enough for them to afford moving. But I told her, I wasn't going to do that. They had been unpleasant to me and I didn't need that kind of negativity around me. She's an adult. She should have known that if she didn't have a job, then she shouldn't have had such an expensive wedding followed by an equally lavish honeymoon. I understand the need to show off wealth, but that's only for people who can actually afford it, not for women with a house husband and 2 teenage stepsons. She was very aware of her responsibilities, but chose to ignore them, and that's not my fault. And I refuse to feel guilty for putting myself first. They can manage on their own because none of this is my problem anymore. I texted her and said the same things I mentioned here, but I tried to be a bit more polite than here because I didn't want to come off as mocking her or anything like that. But she decided to take it as a mockery of what was happening, and told me that I would have to suffer for what I was doing to her. I don't know what to say to that. So I didn't respond because at this point, no matter what I say, she will find a way to make it my fault and blame me for it. So it's better not to say anything and let her wallow in her misery. It's hardly my problem now. Update 3. So, my mom decided to leave the city today, but why would she leave without letting me know how disappointing I am as a child? She could have left quietly, but she is who she is, and so is her husband. So they chose to make a whole spectacle out of it. The last time I talked to her was about 3 weeks ago, but we didn't speak again after that and she didn't bother to contact me either. But today, both she and Julian texted me saying they were thrilled to inform me that Julian's ex-girlfriend had decided to sponsor their trip back home and was even going to let them stay with her because she suddenly realized that she also needed to see her sons. Julian had full custody of his sons, and his ex paid child support, but she was always a bit too busy to make time for her sons. She waited long enough for Julian and my mom to sort out their situation on their own, but when she realized they were useless, she offered to clean up her own mess, which is great for her sons, I suppose. At least some moms do step up even if it's too late. They didn't tell me all of this, but I know this could have been the only possible explanation because they posted a picture of their sons a few hours ago with a lucky clover and a 4-leaf clover sticker as the caption. So, I'm smart enough to figure out what might be the real story behind Julian's ex's sudden epiphany and why she's funding their trip back home. I don't understand exactly why she would sponsor all their plane tickets. But I think Julian's manipulation and stubbornness might have had something to do with it. I know for sure he has that behavior. I've seen it firsthand in the past. I don't know exactly what happened, but I'm relieved they're leaving, and this is the last I'll have to see of them. I also realized how easy I had it after reading some stories people shared here about their crazy families. You can be sure my mom is a bit too worried about her reputation to even try to hurt me in any way because she knows I won't hesitate to call the police. I have enough training to know how to defend myself, so there's no need for me to worry, and now that they're leaving, there's even less reason for me to even think about them. So hooray for me, I guess. I still feel a bit lonely sometimes, but instead of wallowing in it, I now turn to my friends because I think that's a better path forward in situations like this. I completely isolated myself after my dad passed away, and I didn't even realize how lonely I'd become until I read the comments here. It's going to take some time, but I'm going to try to make the best of my life now because I have a stable job, earn a decent income, and have my own home, which isn't something a lot of people my age have. And I'm very grateful to my dad for that. I have great friends who care about me, and honestly, what more does a person need? And if I get into trouble again, I'll just come back here and I'm sure the wonderful people who read it will help me once more. Update 4. Today, I received an unexpected call from my mother. Well, not so unexpected because she had been trying to communicate with me through messages, social media and calls, but I didn't want to talk to her. I finally answered because I was curious about why she was so insistent and also because I wanted her to stop bothering me. It had been several months since we last talked, so I knew this was going to be interesting, to say the least. I was surprised to hear her voice after so long, but my surprise turned to disbelief when she told me that Julian had decided to get back with his ex, the same one who financed their trip back home. Apparently things didn't work out as he expected with my mother, and he decided to resume his previous relationship. My mother was in a state of shock and sadness. She seemed genuinely sorry for everything that had happened, and asked for a chance to reconcile and rebuild our relationship. However, after everything that had happened, I couldn't help but feel indifferent. I had gone through too much stress and pain because of her and Julian's behavior, and I no longer had the desire to let them back into my life. I told her I was sorry, but I had already made my decision and I had no intention of changing it. Even though I could hear the desperation in her voice, I stood firm in my position. After all, I couldn't ignore all the pain they had caused me. Since then, my mother has continued trying to contact me, but I've chosen to block her calls and messages. I know it may be difficult for her, but I have to prioritize my own peace of mind and well-being. That's all for now.